All right, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex Podcast, the PGA edition. I am your host, Bryan. As always, I'm joined by Colin and Pete, aka CSURAN88. In this podcast, we are going to briefly touch on last week's RBC Canadian Open, and then we're going to spend most of our time looking ahead to this week's World Golf Classic Bridgestone Invitational. It is an interesting week in that it is the week before the PGA Championship. Usually, these leading up weeks, we see a weak field as guys sort of get to the major early and really get prepared for that course. But this is a big event, the World Golf Classic Championship. So we do have a loaded field. So really interesting dynamic this week. It is a small field, and we're going to discuss all things Bridgestone for sure. But quickly, let us touch on last week's. Pete, I'll start with you. How was your week, man?
The chalk hit super hard, and I felt like I should have had a good week. Easy 6 of 6. All my golfers are double digits under par, and I mean, it was a small losing week for me. So I had one team that cashed most things, but it was very strange that there's so much scoring and ownership was concentrated on so many guys. Mm-hmm. I think really the salaries more than anything made it kind of a weird week. Essentially, if you either pick Dustin Johnson or you pick some combination of like Charlie Hoffman and Finau. You didn't see as many lineups with Dustin Johnson and like Finau. So everyone kind of had the same roster construction, and there is certainly a small batch of guys that everyone picked. Colin, how did it work out for you?
I'm kind of in the same boat, second guessing myself, but not to an unhealthy degree. Hope you guys like birdies, because man, were there a lot of them, and I think like that, just like the birdie fest, kind of really like it almost makes it really tough to separate yourself from the pack, just because there's so many points, especially when the chalk hits. The one thing that I was kind of thinking about, and like I don't know realistically how much this would have changed my decisions in retrospect. But I was big on Kuchar after the numbers ended up shaking out. And the one thing that is not priced in there is I think if I had to construct like a narrative from scratch, I think a case of Kuchar where it's like, after finishing second in a major, normally there's like a hangover narrative that you could apply. But for someone like Kuchar, who is like one of those like best ever to never win a major, I don't know if he just has like the hangover effect is magnified for someone like that, or like in much to say nothing of like in general. So do you think that is an angle in general, or is that just like leveling myself?
I think it's an angle for sure. He said he was dizzy. Like there's a report of him being dizzy. Like I think it was on Friday. Yeah. He almost missed the cut. He was even back nine on Friday, like 4 strokes off the cut line, and he goes -5 on the back, which was easier with 3 par 5s. But he's an ultimate grinder. But I think that narrative is certainly true. I would not be taking Kuchar that. I mean,
who does that? I presumably that narrative applies to some people more than others. Like if you just got second in a major and you're just hungover for the next week, I'm trying to figure out when is that noise and when is that signal? Is someone's like prior major history something worth factoring in? Like if it was like Rory that came in second or something, or like DJ that came in second.
I think it's noise.
Like. I don't know. I'm struggling about how
that's 100% subjective analysis that you have to do, evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. And I would assume most people have a down week after that scenario. Grinding it out in the major and then losing and then immediately playing that following week. I would assume haven't done well.
Yeah, he was like Pete said, he was apparently feeling a little dizzy and just not feeling well on Friday. Ended up, sneaking into the cut line because of the good last couple holes. But like, it's hard to like figure out, was he feeling dizzy, not feeling well because of the grind and the stress that coming in second yet again took on him, or was it because of the travel back from England? Like that's a noisy, but definitely something to think about. It's sort of hard to figure out, but yeah, I mean the chalk hit. So I think we're sort of setting ourselves up for an interesting couple of weeks because the chalk has hit twice in a row now. And by definition, the chalk can't just hit every week. So we'll see when the shoe drops here. But let's transition and talk about the World Golf Classic Bridgestone Invitational. This is played in Akron, Ohio at the Firestone Country Club, which is a pretty renowned course here in the U.S. It has been played here quite a bit. It's hosted a couple PGA championships as well. Really difficult course. It does play pretty long because of the par relative to par. It is a par 70, 7,400 yards. If you look at past champions, the field is definitely pretty loaded. I think I saw a stat of the last 22 years, there have only been 2 players who have won that have not won a major. So that's interesting. Obviously, the best golfers really stand out here. It is a smaller field, and there is no cut line. So that is an interesting dynamic that we talk about every once in a while with these events, but probably worth just having a quick conversation about. Colin, kick to you. What sort of course is this?
So I know it kind of plays long, but like distance has only been a major, like a factor 2 out of the 5 last years and only 1 of the last 5.
Mm-hmm.
I think accuracy pops a little bit more than others, and maybe to some degree GAR, but like, yeah, it's on the weaker side for a course fit field. Interestingly enough, I think the only thing that's kind of consistently above the positive line is scrambling, which we rarely see as being like ever important just because it's such a noisy stat. And so like, but it's still such a weak feel or a weak weight that I'm not giving a whole lot of weight or credence. The bottom line is like, you have to be like essentially good at something. All else being equal, if I had to pick, I'd probably go like accuracy and scrambling. So yeah, like your Stensons, your Caseys, like your Garcias are going to be fine for good ball striking. But I don't know. I'm not putting too much weight on it. So, but yeah, I think the no cut is a far more interesting dynamic to talk about. I don't know. Yeah, and like the world and the WGC factor is another. Like I don't know where everyone's incentives are. I know there's a lot of exceptions to talk about. So. I don't know, Pete, what are you weighing this week more than others, if not course fit?
Yeah, just scoring. I mean, you're trying to get the guys to – I mean, we've had this conversation a bunch, but it's something that you have to absolutely do. So I think that it makes a lot of sense to target scoring in this situation. I'm going to be looking for the guys who make a lot of birdies, trying to figure out guys who are good at actually making 3 birdies in a row for the DraftKings bonus, trying to figure out guys who might get hot in certain stretches. And you can look at a golf course too. Like last week, obviously everyone made a bunch of birdies, but you had the par 5 so close together that it was a lot easier to get those streaks. So I'm trying to identify potentially some scenarios that would make sense. And then, yeah, I've been looking at scrambling, and there's a couple guys in particular that stand out quite a bit. Everyone knows Ricky's been scrambling incredibly. He has one of the highest long-term scrambling percentages. And then one guy who's interesting, who I think is going to be mega chalk this week, is Adam Scott, who's actually leading in recent scrambling. So,
yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I built a model for Firestone, and Adam Scott is popping quite a bit. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement. In my research, it seems that scrambling and then recent play is definitely really important. I guess, Colin, like, do you think that's just because with the field so loaded and so small that like guys that are just in good form may pop out a little more than usual?
I mean, yeah, it's a packed field for sure. You're probably going to get a lot of like you're going to get a lot of good golfers here. So you got a lot of people like rating well. It's always relative to the field. That's just one thing to interpret when you're putting together models and player models, and just be aware of that. So yeah, there's going to be some poppers for sure.
Quick game theory question for you guys before we jump into player specific analysis. Pete, with the field smaller than usual and it is loaded, there are some guys that are, as usual, sort of like the majors, are pretty low priced. Like, for example, Charlie Hoffman, who was one of the most expensive golfers last week and has played really well lately, especially last week. Ended up losing on a playoff hole, but still came in second, is down in the low 7K range. It seems like there might be more lineup overlap this week. What are your thoughts on that? Like maybe some ways to get off. It seems like with such a loaded field, like there's not many bad golfers that taking a little more salary off the table might be like, this might be the best week to do that sort of thing.
So I think we'll have way less overlap in general versus last week. I think that basically there's so many options at the top that you can go a lot of different directions. So the high-end golfers will be spread out a lot more. Obviously, we only had a couple last week. So that will make for more variety, but I obviously like the idea of taking money off the table. It's critical. One of the biggest things if you're playing like the dog leg, you don't want to have a duplicate lineup. It just kills your equity. So any strategy to basically mitigate the chances of that happening makes sense.
Yeah, I think this almost gets into like short slate strategy 101, which we see a lot more in like stuff like NBA and NHL, where like I think in short slates over there, it's probably correct to leave more money off the table just because like, yeah, I mean, like it's a little bit different because you still do have like 70 golfers to choose from, maybe like 55 effectively, or even like 50, as opposed to NBA where realistically, you can have as few as like 20 players that build a 10-person lineup. So there's still enough spread out choice here. I think ownership is going to be like, yeah, like you said, Pete, like a lot more spread out, not concentrated among 3 or 4. That makes it a little bit more difficult to kind of separate yourself from the pack. And combine the fact that this is a no cut, that I think like ownership gives you a little bit less leverage because, like the scenario you're rooting for is for chalk to miss the cut, but they can't. So your point differential, even if your contrarian picks hit, don't really separate yourself as much. I think the net after all of that, like what does a short slate mean, is like you have a little bit of edge, a little bit of less edge. Like if you want to take it to a ridiculous extreme, take the Hyundai Tournament of Champions, which is a 30-person field. They're on slates for that. That's nearly impossible to like play contrarian correctly. And like maybe at some point, like is the Hyundai TOC going to be beatable with Rake next year, given the state of people's analytics? I don't know. That's a fun one, but that's going to be the first one to go where it's quote unquote unplayable. But yeah, I think the net is just maybe bet less this week. I think everyone's edge is just less. I mean, that's the conclusion I come to.
So would you say that the smaller the slate, say this is directed to either one of you, the smaller the slate, the more important it is to just have a unique lineup?
Yeah, I think so. Like that, the only way you can separate is to get low ownership, but that's tough to do. So yeah.
And tournaments for sure, and then obviously grinding cash. You'd be surprised if people make mistakes still in short slates. So, but yeah, it is much closer to being solved. Obviously, less options, and we're close on football. The big thing in football, if you're playing the short slates for tournaments, it's not quite as applicable as this for cash games. But you want to play the studs always. Like just pay up for the absolute studs. You get your top end guys at all costs, just to lock up because the floors for scores obviously much lower as well. So. Yeah.
Teasing football content. Season's right around the corner. Oh man.
Football's close. In tournaments, you can do some crazy stuff, but I'm not sure what.
Yeah. Well, in tournaments, I think in football, we'll talk about this on different pods, but I think you get some edge with like some weird correlations and stuff like that. But we'll jump back to golf. Even though I'm excited about NFL, we'll probably have salaries for week 1, probably in the next week or so. So definitely get ready for a lot of content on the site. All right, let's jump into the players for this week. Again, it is a very, very loaded field. We just have all the best golfers in the world. It is headlined by reigning British Open champion Jordan Spieth, who is the highest priced golfer at $12K. Dustin Johnson, who won this event last year, 11-8. Rory, Brooks Koepka, Ricky, Hideki are all the guys above 10K. So definitely a little bit of a tier right there. Then it gets down. But I mean, it's interesting. I guess it's going to be, like you said, hard to take some like really hard stands on some guys. Maybe you could go really overweight on some of these players. But if we're just looking at early projected ownership, and again, these always change a little bit once we have some tout recs and some other data that come in, some line movement and stuff. We'll have a better idea of projected ownership. But right now, really everyone in the top, like the top 20 high salaried golfers are all projected for pretty moderate ownership. So it's going to be hard to take some stands. So Colin, I'll kick to you first. What are your thoughts on some of these top golfers, and what are you doing about, like, let's talk a little more contrarian. Are you just going to go like majorly overweight on some of these guys?
Yeah, it's really tough to separate what's going to happen with all of these guys. DJ's ownership is going to be particularly interesting for a bunch of reasons. One, because I do have him at the top of the field right now. His distance is always going to be there and a huge part of DraftKings scoring. And I know people are going to flock to like he won last year, but I actually have his course history here as net negative. Because if you look at the rest of his results, like they look impressive at first glance, but then, okay, it's a no-cut event. So, like that's 53rd or whatever is effectively the same as missing the cut. And like his win last year was just when he was in such world-beating form that he was practically expected to win that tournament. So I actually like it doesn't weight really relative to, how does he perform at this course relative to his kind of baseline level. So I have him at the top. Like this is unsurprisingly, like a lot of these guys kind of rate out really similarly. The one guy that I think people might get priced out of and you have a glimmer of having low ownership is Brooks Koepka. It's kind of weird to see him, right there with like Spieth, DJ, and Rory. But like I believe that pricing basically. I'd take him over Fowler. I'd take him over Matsuyama. I think people might not want to spend up that much. And I think like if I'm going to spend up, like it's probably going to be at him, where it's the only place you can get low ownership as of now.
Yeah, definitely good points. Pete, what are your thoughts on this?
Remember when we were debating if Koepka's a good play like the 7,000 range, and I was arguing that he's a good golfer.
He's 11-1. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he wins the major, and I was stupid. I faded him that week. I think it was for that the Arizona tournament with the Waste Management that Hideki won.
Yeah, we always talked about him as a tilting guy, and now he's just such an elite. He's in elite form right now, at least.
Oh yeah, he's playing extremely well and showing off how good of an athlete he is for sure. I think that Hideki Matsuyama makes a lot of sense at this range too. I'm curious to see his ownership's kind of picking up. I think Ricky Fowler will soak up a lot of that ownership too. People have just taken Ricky a ton this year, even in these spots. So I think Matsuyama is another one I'm looking at in the high-end range. Guy makes a ton of birdies, and he's been as consistent as anyone on tour. So I think he's a really chalky but good play. In terms of leverage, I think that Koepka is probably the right call by Colin. It's going to be really challenging to find anyone else who's going to be low-owned in this range. Rory, we have the caddy angle, which is interesting. He's moving to a different caddy, so we'll see if he can actually make a putt. But he sets up really well for DraftKings scoring. This is also not a bad spot to take him. But I imagine he'll be somewhat heavily owned. I think between him, Spieth, Fowler, those guys are all going to be heavily owned.
Yeah, I got to jump in here really quick because I'm not sure I agree with the Matsuyama call, and it's a very simple reason. It's just not good history. Look at the results. There hasn't been a top 10 here, and the last 2 years especially, he's finished in the bottom half of the field. That's just it. I think that's depressing it a little bit. I get it under any other circumstances, but I think that's why he's priced at the low 10s and not like the upper 10s or even low 11s.
I agree with Colin. I actually, the course history stuff I haven't thoroughly gone through, so that would knock him down. But looking at birdies, I mean, maybe Spieth's another guy. I just think he'll be really popular. Spieth's a guy who's obviously right now #1 weighted birdie average for the year. You can look at our birdie stuff as well, but Hideki's always ranking in a very top tier percentile this year in weighted birdie average. He's 3rd, so that's the reason that in these type of events I like him. But the course history angle certainly is applicable here. Maybe it's not a cash game play.
So we agree that Brooks is probably the lowest owned of these like high 9, or I guess just guys above 10K.
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%.
Okay, well, let's go down just a little bit to this next tier, and these are some guys that are a little bit maligned lately, just haven't been playing quite as well as we might expect. Jason Day is a good example. Jon Rahm has been a little up and down lately. Justin Rose as well. Stenson, really interesting tier here, most notably because they're obviously below the guys that we consider the studs. And then they're also right above guys that I think are going to be particularly chalky this week because they rate so well in some of these important metrics. And Paul Casey at 9K and Adam Scott at 8.8. Pete, I'll kick to you first. What are your thoughts on this 9K tier? It seems like that some of these guys might be a little lower owned than expected because of their sort of weird price point between these two tiers, I guess.
Right. I think Scott and Casey are definitely going to be chalk. So I agree with you in that analysis, which makes this tier Potentially a good place to, start lineups. I mean, you can start a lineup with two of these guys as well. John Rahm, I definitely think, is a guy who could break out again here. I think that obviously he hasn't been as consistent as he was when he first came out of the gate. He was rating super well, but the talent's there, and he's so young that I think, this could be a good time to buy low on John Rahm. The rest of the tier, I mean, Stenson has nice course history here. And if you're going to go the accuracy angle, ball striking angle, I certainly get that with Stenson. So I think he'd be the other guy. We're looking at Sergio. He's been posting all these videos and pictures with how his life is so great right now. He got the SB, the Masters trophy, he got married, posted pictures about that. So if you want to play a narrative, I'm not really sure how to play the just married and total bliss narrative, but that's where Sergio's at. And he's probably going to be, somewhat owned, but not super owned. Colin, any strong takes in this range?
Yeah, I think so. I'm polarized on the two guys you mentioned at the start. Rahm, I'm going to probably even more bullish than you on, because there's a single result that's really propping up even his recent stuff, and that's his win at the Irish Open. It's not just that he won, it's that he beat it by 6 strokes. It's the classic, if you believe in margin of victory, and I know we've talked about that a bunch here, then the fact that he just straight blew out a field, you just don't see that at essentially any level, either PGA Tour or Euro or whatever. So anytime you get a blowout and lapping the field almost, that bodes really well. So I was never really off of him. I think he's easily the strongest play under 10K. And on Scott, I don't know, I get it. Everyone's going to be looking at odds per dollar, and that's going to be why he's going to be so chalky at that range. But I just straight up don't agree with the odds this week, which is, a spicy take for sure. I think his course history in aggregate is still negative. I don't think his recent results are all that impressive. I think, we talk about subpar results in the Euro Tour being a death sentence, and I think a 35 at the Scottish qualifies, even though it's a little bit heavier. And there's just not enough other results to kind of cancel out some of these mediocre to below average stuff he's posted in the last 6 weeks. So I don't know. I can find a fade for Scott 100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Adam Scott, especially at that price point, if you just sort our models this week by miscut percentage, the lowest percentage of miscuts over the last year, so long-term miscut percentage, Sergio is number one in the field at 6% miscuts over his last 31 tournaments. Adam Scott is second in the field at only 8% miscuts. So I definitely understand, if this was a miscut event and he at 8-8, he's definitely, with his scrambling numbers and especially recent scrambling numbers, he's definitely a must play in cash. But Pete, we don't have to deal with a cut this week, so it's sort of it makes him a little tough to deal with,
Right. Colin's making me a little nervous on Scott. He's number one in my fantasy labs model, so I'll have to look a little bit more into this.
Me too, but I don't know what to do about him.
Well, Colin's throwing some water on this Adam Scott.
I'm so happy I'm just causing more problems than I'm solving. You're welcome, everybody.
So
I think he's still going to be really popular.
He is going to be popular. That is not in dispute. But I think on leverage alone, I think he's a fade, and I think the numbers actually back that it's a clear-cut fade in my mind.
So what are your thoughts on Casey? Because I think that he's harder to get away from for me than Scott.
I think if you gave me Casey versus Scott heads up, I'd take Casey 11 times out of 10. Depending on where the ownership ends up, I think Paul Casey could end up as the number one owned player in the field. Because it is phenomenal history. I think the Fitz rating out pretty well. He is definitely harder to get away from, but that falls under your very standard. It's so tough to get away from this chalk, which we've been hit with the last couple of weeks. To say nothing of the fact that the chalk is hit. So,
John Rahm, speaking of which, let's go back to him real quick. So I think he's the one who's most interesting to me. I was going to be really heavy on him, so I'm happy to hear you're bullish on him. But he was heavily owned for a long time. He joked even on the Golf Channel that everyone asks or comes up to him and says he's on their fantasy team. So John Rahm, I really like him. Obviously, he had that stretch which I think is still in my mind a little bit, in terms of just the inconsistencies. Obviously, he's played great recently with that win at the Irish, but he gets really angry. So when he's on the course and you watch a lot of Jon Rahm, he looks like he's massively tilted. He's always getting pissed off. And then historically, he's bounced back by making a lot of birdies. And that's kind of what he's trying to do, fire himself up to make birdies. But that will stick in most people's minds. And I'm really interested to see what his ownership ends up being, because there's, especially after this with Colin being high on him, I do think that there's going to be more attention to him, and his price is really nice. He makes a lot of birdies as well. But that attitude he's shown, I think, has turned off a couple people. So we'll see if he's the uber chalk like he's been in the past.
Is Jason Day a fade?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, as said, yeah, I basically have him and Rory still kind of down in the dumps. It is so weird to see him below 10K at like any level, but I basically agree with it. The history isn't quite there. It's kind of a lousy fit. He hasn't really shown enough to get back into super form. Like, yeah, it's not a compelling play.
He's even said he's not playing his best right now. So until he starts playing his best, I think he's a fade when he's even around these guys.
Cool. All right, let's drop down to the what we'll call the value guys and sort of talk who we think are going to be the chalk in this range, and then some potential pivots. Like I mentioned at the top, I think there are some pretty mispriced guys. My first example was Charlie Hoffman, who ended up coming second at last week's Canadian Open. He was 10-3 in that event, and now he's 7-4. So definitely interesting. Gary Woodland is a guy who's actually more expensive than Charlie Hoffman this week, despite being much cheaper than him last week. So interesting pricing dynamics, but he's been playing really well lately. Two, Xander, our young guy that we are definitely on, playing really well. Colin, I'll kick to you on this one. Who do you think are going to be some of the choppier golfers in this value range here?
Well, depending on where we start the value range, I think at 8K, I think it starts with Mark Leishman. I think he's just a guy that just gets touted all the time. He's backed up results every single time. He's probably going to get touted again, and I can't really blame him. I think it's a decent play. I think the other guys that showed well last week, Gary Woodland and Charlie Hoffman, just like you said, are going to be right up there. I think that's just, those are, top tier finishes that I guess feel like they should be priced in, but don't really feel like they are. And just recent results will have people really happy about it. The only other ones I could see cracking maybe 10-15% in the value range are probably Charles Schwartzel and Russell Henley. That's a pure history play. They've both done really well here before. I think that's going to get touted a lot. I think the Rex will follow, and everybody will, and their ownership will follow as well.
Molinari is a guy just going through that stands out to me as a price point, but bad history, not playing well.
Awful history. It's not just bad history. It's straight up awful history. The worst in the field.
Yeah.
That is why his price is so low.
And he sucks lately.
Yeah.
He's missed both cuts to major. He's been chalky. So he's someone who stands out to me just based on the price, but I probably won't go there because of that. I think that you guys hit on some guys who are going to have a lot of recency bias, especially someone like Charlie Hoffman. But there's a ton of names down here that are really good. If you're looking for just talent, birdie making, I really think Peters is interesting. Obviously more of a bomber, but I really like him quite a bit. I think that you can find an argument for some of these other Euro guys. Bernd Wiesberger has shown some decent form. You mentioned Xander. I like a lot of those guys. So this is definitely where you differentiate. Ross Fisher's another one who did play well at the Open. I like this field. I think there's a lot of options down here. I'm always a sucker for guys like Emiliano Grillo, and then our boy Hudson Swafford. If you read Super Savings is 6,300. So that's kind of the guys that I've looked at. But this is definitely the range where you can get more differentiation. I think finding someone that you feel confident is going to give you leverage is important in this range.
Yeah. So how chalky do we think, Colin, some of these guys are, the mispriced guys in the 7K range are sometimes the most chalky guys in the entire tournament, just because they're such the obvious value plays. So, if we think that, Hoffman, Woodland, Schwartzel, Leash, those guys, how chalky do you think they're going to be exactly? Do you think they're going to get above 20%, above 25%? Where would you put lines on some of these?
I don't think you have I don't know that any of them crack 20% as of now. And I don't know. I mean, a lot of that is just because there's so many other like good names at like other price points that like ownership is going to be way more spread out. And just like, yeah, this is like most of the times you get those chalky, like over concentrated 30 percenters in the value tier, like when it's a weaker field or like when there's not just like talent spread everywhere. So I mean, I still think they're fades because like, you still need even more leverage at this tier, but no, I don't think I think Hoffman is probably my best bet now for owned highest, but like I would take under 20% for pretty much anybody under 8K.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So yeah, Pete, like it's I don't know, like some of these guys that are like 35% owned at 7K that definitely are more at risk to miss the cut, but do have some nice numbers. Like those are always interesting fades in tournaments. But if no guy is going to be like over 20%, you can make a case for still like making some unique lineups with going Hoffman and then going some of those like 9K guys that we think could be interesting to start lineups with.
Absolutely. You can always get some leverage by doing a different roster construction. I think that this range is my biggest debate. My biggest regret is not loading up in some of these higher stakes tournaments with the chalk in the majors. And you can get a lot of data as well. Just there's more market information. There's more liquid markets. So you can really find out who are like the top plays. And my biggest regrets for the Open Championship, Fisher and Cabrera Bello, who I both had in cash games. I didn't play them as much in the Thunderdome, and they turned out to be great plays. And that's where I was kind of kicking myself, was just taking the equity of these low-end guys. And they're actually not as heavily owned, especially in the higher stakes stuff, because everyone's trying to find leverage with a couple 1 or 2% guys. So that's the debate that I'm still working on for this tournament in particular. I don't think there's too much to overanalyze. I think you find angles that you like. A couple other guys I just want to shout out before we pick winners. I think Daniel Berger, we didn't talk about him. He makes a ton of sense this week. I really like his price tag for his upside. Yeah. Daniel Berger is another young guy that just he can win at any point in time. So I really like Daniel Berger. And then also JB Holmes, a guy that is probably not very high in equity, but if you're just going to chase birdies, Colin, is it wrong to just play JB Holmes in some tournaments like every single week, basically?
No, like you're asking the wrong person, because I'll stand for him forever. But like in terms of birdie making, like yeah, sure. I mean, it's like yes, it's almost like high risk, high reward. Like I think there's some signal there about like people who go like birdie bogey more than just like par, probably less than everyone thinks, but like it is a factor. So if that's the angle you're going for, then like yeah, I could see that. He'll always have the distance to like get to impossible shots.
I think it's a great pivot off of Charlie Hoffman and God, who am I thinking about?
Woodland,
yeah, Woodland. Yeah, because he's 100 and 200.
I agree with that. I think you're going to get definitely more leverage.
Yeah, I like the Berger call too. I like Berger better than Leishman, just straight up. So that's my call of the week.
I like Berger better than Leishman too, Colin. You have a different stance?
I have it dead even right now, so not enough to introduce a hot take.
Fair enough. Real quick before we pick winners, can we find guys that are under 5% that we like? That might be tough. I mean, there's
we already covered it. Well, actually, like this week, I think you're gonna have to go. Like my two like big ones are Euro. The one I really like that's going to be under 5, like we've talked about before, is Bernd Wiesberger. Who I think like every time we've got on him, like he's had like it hasn't been phenomenal results to drive up his ownership, but they're still solid and definitely justify his leverage. So I think he's probably your best bet this week for like low own. And the other one, dipping down into a name we haven't heard in forever, is Andy Sullivan, who has never played this course before, but like at 7K, I think he's just going to get lost. There's going to be nothing compelling that anybody's going to jump out to and want to pick him because he's never played this course before. So like anytime someone doesn't have history, I think that depresses people's ownership. But just looking at how he's done in general, there are a lot of Euro results here, but the last time he missed a cut was in February in Dubai. And ever since then, there's been some promising things. I mean, like there's basically been like a bunch of top 20s on the Euro result, which I look as essentially like holding serve as far as like being a decent play. But at 7K, like I think that's as good as value as you're going to find, even like right up there, like, you know, with your Ross Fishiers or like even close to your Henleys or whatever. At 4%, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one interesting guy, just because he's playing really well and we think he might be chalky, but maybe not, as Xander. I don't exactly know where his ownership is going to be. He's right there below Woodland and Hoffman. So I think potentially, like, I don't think he's going to be like 1%, but I do think he could be single digits. And that's sort of an interesting leverage play for me with how he's playing. Pete, any other guys you want to add, or you want to pick some winners?
Pick some winners.
Cool. I think we went first last week, so anyone dying to go first here?
I'll take it. Yeah, I'll go Bryan. I'll go DJ.
I'll go second. I'll take Spieth.
Oh gosh. Okay. I'm gonna take. Oh god. I'm gonna take Rahm. And then let's go under 9K. Under 9K. Gosh, I mean, so I guess the chalky pick is Adam Scott, but I'm gonna go contrarian. I'm gonna go Berger.
That's what I wanted. That's frustrating.
Adam Scott's wide open for you, though.
Did I do enough?
My dad is a huge Tommy Fleetwood fan, so I'm going to take Tommy Fleetwood.
I can't believe you took Fleetwood. Oh, my God. I was staring right at him. That was getting my weirdo. How far down do I want to go? Like, all right, I'm just so tilted. I'm taking Hoffman, my chalky. I just had my heart set on Fleetwood so much that I'm just going to rage quit this podcast.
Yeah, we didn't talk about Fleetwood, but he's actually popping pretty well in my model. So that's interesting for sure.
Yeah, I just think he's going to be around 15%, maybe if he gets touted even higher. So, like, it's just like it's tough.
Fair enough. All right. Well, we will end it there. Thank you guys for listening or watching. As always, we're going to have a ton of content next week and probably the end of this week once we get some salaries out for the PGA Championship. So stay tuned for that. Good luck, and we'll talk to you guys soon.